chipmunk, squirrel seeks chipmunk. Chipmunk seeks squirrel. Squirrel seeks chipmunk. Yeah, that's it. Hey there. So if you're here, you probably already know what the deal is here. This is what I call Ask Alicia, and it is where I answer your questions, where you, for some reason, want my advice on or my opinions. We know how I love to talk, so I'm already out of breath. That's not a good sign. I thought that I didn't have enough questions for this series, and now looking at them, I'm realizing I have a handful of them, but not only that, most of them, or at least half of them, deal with mental health. So I'm going to try not to ramble, but because of that, I'm just going to dive right into the questions. Oh, but first, because you're probably not going to see this much in frame, I decided that because we're all going through stressful times, and I do want to say, if you're feeling a little wacko right now, you're not the only one. It is actually everyone that is feeling this way. So I thought I'd put on one of my more motivational shirts. It is probably one of my favorite t-shirts. It says, "Babe, you got this." And you do. So, going through these questions, I will say that I structured this in such a way that I wanted to start with kind of the lighter questions first and then get into those that are a little heavier or require more thought. Somebody asked me, "Are you a reader? And if yes, what is your favorite book?" Yes, I am a reader. Now, I will say, since I started my YouTube channel, I have really been neglecting my reading goal. So if you've been following me on Instagram for a while, you might notice that each year I set a goal for myself in terms of how many books I'm going to read that year. And there are conditions around that. So if you're a reader or a book lover, you probably have a shelf full of books that you've accumulated but never got to reading. And I have a big one of those shelves. So I want to take the next few years to get through those books. So my way of going about that is each year I set a goal for how many books I want to read that year. So for instance, this year I set the goal at 12 books. And if I buy a book, that's fine, but that means I need to add a book to that number. So even though my goal has been changed to 13 by this point, I am still going to have to whittle down that neglected shelf by 12 books by the end of the year. How I'm going to do that with a full-time job plus YouTube, I don't know, but I am somebody who sticks by her goals, so we'll give it a go. For now, I am reading Calypso by David Sedaris. He is a comedian. If you look into him, I would highly recommend a book called Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk. Chipmunk seeks squirrel. Squirrel seeks chipmunk. Yeah, that's it. But yes, so when I do finish a book, I always post a photo to my Instagram of myself with the book and talk a little bit about what I thought of it. This is a super quick reminder to like and subscribe if that's something you want to do. If that's not something you want to do, I'm sorry for the interruption. I'll shut up and start talking now. And to talk about my favorite genres, I grabbed a couple from my bookshelf. So my favorite fiction author, even though he's written a nonfiction book, which was really good, is Truman Capote. So we're all familiar with Breakfast at Tiffany's. We love the movie. The book is even better, as any book lover says about any book turned movie. I also love to read about ideology, theology, faith, philosophy, books in that genre. And one that I really, really liked recently is called Tattoos on the Heart. I honestly don't know what compelled me to pick this book up. It says underneath the title, The Power of Boundless Compassion. So at the time I may have thought, hey, compassion, want to read about that. But it really surprised me. It is about a Jesuit priest who decides to take on really transforming a community in LA that was just full of rival gangs. And the work that Gregory Boyle is his name. The work that Gregory Boyle did in that community is so inspiring important, and heartbreaking at times. I really, really, really loved this one. Another genre I love to read about, anything in the realm of psychology and or neurology. I love learning about the brain. Sociology, I would lump that in as well. So one book I really liked that was recommended to me is How to Be Human by Ruby Wax. And it says here, with a neuroscientist and a monk. So I just think that says it all. But Ruby is, I believe she's a comedian. She's a very funny writer. And this book really is almost like a really long form interview where she brings up certain topics and questions and poses those same questions to a neuroscientist as well as a monk. And I will say that it's not surprising, but still refreshing to find that scientists and leaders in faith, for lack of a better term, tend to agree on a lot. So that's cool. And along those same lines, as you probably know, I am an alcoholic in recovery. I've been sober for 7.5 years. And since getting sober, my favorite genre has been addiction memoirs. So this isn't necessarily my favorite, but this is one that I read last year, Memoirs of an Addicted Brain by Mark Lewis. What I love about this, and I'll read the line here too, it says, a neuroscientist examines his former life on drugs. And that was really cool because he really goes through his entire history of everything he'd ever tried and talks about what happens in the brain on those substances. So really fascinating stuff, and for some reason I find that it helps me to stay on track with my recovery, so that's awesome. What I didn't grab is my collection of Harry Potter books. Harry Potter was a little after my time. I've said it a few times, I'm 34 years old, but I have siblings that are a good bit younger than me, 8 to 10 years younger than me, and some of my best friends are a good bit younger than me, so they all kind of encouraged me to start the series a few years ago. So I did finish that last year, and I am totally glad that I read them. I also, even in my 30s, feel really accomplished for having finished all those books. How kids do it, I don't know, but I'm impressed. I love to read, but I will say I don't consider myself a good reader. I do read slowly and I do lose focus a good bit. So I do have to set goals, page goals, like as I mentioned, book goals for the year. So now that I pointed that out to you guys, I'm probably gonna have to do a better job of sticking to my book goal this year, so I'll get started on that. Next question. In your March 4th Ask Alicia, you mentioned you schedule your time, and I was curious if there's a specific style of schedule you prefer. And of course, that is a little bit of a complex question, especially right now, for a few different reasons. There is my usual day-to-day life before YouTube, which was very more cut and dry time. That's not to say that I'm in any way complaining about what my life is like now, but it's definitely busier. So there is also my schedule around both my full-time job and YouTube. And now there is my recent schedule here at home. So let's see. So my day-to-day before YouTube, I really wanted to make sure that I was getting all of the things done that I wanted in a day, as well as all the things that I enjoyed. So for me, the foundation of sticking to that schedule was making sure that I got a full night's sleep. I would try to get to bed somewhere around 10, 11 o'clock, and wake up around 6:30, which is actually 2 hours before walking out the door. And I felt like those 2 hours gave me plenty of time to wake up fully, take my time getting ready, doing my hair and makeup, picking out an outfit, taking care of the kitties. I've mentioned before that Oliver is diabetic, so he does require medication and care in the morning and at night. So I felt like those 2 hours gave me plenty of time to take care of all that stuff. And Also take outfit pictures. If you haven't checked out my Instagram, I post outfits of the day. Of course, I can't be running out the door and frantic if I'm going to take the time to take those photos. About 3 or 4 times a week, I made sure to get myself to the gym, so I incorporated that into my workday. So instead of taking actual lunch breaks when I'm at the office, I actually head down to the gym. I'm fortunate enough that the building I work in has a decent gym. So I get my workouts in during the workday. And then at home, once I got settled, that gave me a few hours to myself here to work on my reading goals, as well as just kind of veg out to whatever Netflix documentary I was on at that time. It was a lot of rinse and repeat, but it was a schedule that kind of kept me sane and happy, and it's a schedule I enjoyed. Now, right now, things are a lot more chaotic, and I don't know that I have anything down pat just yet. It's something that I'm working on, but then as I set a schedule, things change, so that's still a work in progress. But more or less, it's a lot of the same, but I am using those hours in the evening to work on YouTube stuff, filming and editing, research, all that stuff. I still try to get to bed at a reasonable hour. And in order to maintain a semblance of balance, I pretty much cut myself off between Friday evening and Monday morning. And that allows me to spend time with my boyfriend. We are somewhat long distance as he lives about an hour away. So that weekend time really gives me time to decompress, spend a good bit of time offline, which is important, and recharge so that I can go full force when the week starts. As for now, my day isn't a ton different right now. I am fortunate in that I have a job that can be done remotely if need be. And I still spend my evenings, for the most part, working on YouTube stuff. What is different here is that because I am not getting fully dressed and made up every day, and I'm not commuting to the office, that really does free up about 3 or so hours of my day. And so that allows me to stay up later if I want. And so with that extra time, that allows me to sometimes dedicate more time to YouTube if that's what I want to do, or get a good balance of YouTube and that Netflix veg time. I'll get into it a little bit more as the questions go on in terms of how I balance everything right now, but that's the general framework. Someone asked me, how do you handle hate online? And let's be totally honest here. I did not see my channel really grow until about a month ago. So this is something that for sure I have not perfected. Thankfully, I don't see a ton of hate. Even on the days where I get really frustrated by the comments that I'm getting online, I can take a step back and realize that there's not a ton of negativity. Even on my commentary videos, which you would think would be a little more polarizing, it's really not that bad there. Of course, we saw a wave of videos about Gabby Hanna in the beginning of this YouTube career so far. And I've talked about those stands and how they can behave in the comments. And at times it got to me, but really just kind of bouncing those feelings off of a friend, a loved one, a partner really helps. I think for people like me, when you know nothing about the person making the comment, you tend to imagine that they're a person like you. Maybe I'm the only person like this. If there are any creators watching this, please let me know if you experience anything similar to this. But I imagine that the people I'm talking to are like me. So I tend to walk into every comment valuing what people have to say and with a good bit of trust. So sometimes I need to regroup after reading a hateful comment. And at this point, I cannot attribute anything hateful to anything that's wrong with me. And I hope that that doesn't come across as arrogant. I just don't think that I have given you guys any reason to be hateful towards me. I've said a million times, disagree with me, that's totally fine. Criticize me, give me feedback, that's totally fine, but hate is not welcome on my channel. So if somebody decides to come here and be hateful towards me or anyone else, something is going on with that person. I know that it's kind of cliche to say, but there is something else going on. And we can't discredit the possibility, the probability, that a lot of these people are dealing with crap in their own lives and need a receptacle for their anger. So the more I keep that in mind, the more I give less value to the words. I still value the person. I still have compassion for the person, and I think that allows me to respond, if I do decide to respond, in a way that is somewhat respectful and kind and compassionate. But those words themselves have less and less meaning the more I keep those things in mind. I hope that makes sense. And I think it's really, really important. And I'm starting to find that I don't think people really quite understand the difference between hate and disagreement. So for me, it is really, really important to recognize when someone is disagreeing with me or criticizing me versus being hateful. And it actually may be more difficult to handle those respectful disagreements because it does take more brain power to respond to something valid, or something that is simply well-meaning or comes as a product of critical thinking. That's what's been more of an exercise for me, but the more I take a moment to check my ego and respond respectfully, even if it stings a little bit, because it does sometimes. The more I do it, the more it becomes habit, and the better I feel about myself. So that's something to keep in mind. And to be honest with you, when it comes to hate comments, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting so many comments sometimes that I can't read all of them. And I think probably a lot of creators would agree that you start to learn what a hate comment looks like just from reading the first couple of words or just by glancing at it. So if I've got a ton of comments to read, I'm not going to focus on those that at first glance shout, this is going to be a hate comment. One of you guys asked me, I have anxiety and depression like most older teens nowadays. However, I don't have anyone around me to talk about it with. I can't seem to get close to people. It hurts when I don't have anyone to turn to, especially during times like these. I know it's a weird thing to ask, but any advice? Of course I've got advice. My advice in these situations is actually pretty simple and oftentimes is not what people want to hear, but it's such a simple approach. Therapy. And if it doesn't go against any sort of values or ideology of yours, consider talking to a psychiatrist about medication. Now, I can only speak from my personal experience with both anxiety and depression, and I think I have a pretty good handle on it. Of course, that doesn't mean I feel good all the time, but overall, my life is great as somebody who has anxiety and depression. And that is thanks to a few things. That is thanks to therapy. It is so important to find a therapist that you mesh well with. That is thanks to medication. I am on medication. I've talked about this before, and it's made a world of difference in my life, and it really helps me. I know a lot of people are afraid of kind of feeling out of it by being on medication, but with my experience, being on the medication that I am helps me to feel more like myself. Because when I am in a depressive state or anxious state, I don't feel like myself. And then the rest is on me. The rest is, work that I have to do. So, and again, that's something we'll talk a little bit more about. But I think if you are experiencing anxiety and depression and you need to know what the next step is, it is to get professional help, especially if you have access to that. If you're covered by any sort of insurance, that should not be too difficult to get. It does take some work. but it's work that's totally worth it. There are some grants out there that will pay for therapy for people who can't afford therapy. Because my insurance doesn't cover where I do get therapy, I am covered by a grant given by the District of Columbia. So that's something to look into. And I would say if those are still not options for you, we live in an age where you have access to so many resources. So I strongly recommend 12-step programs. There are 12-step programs for just about everything these days. And for me, my time in AA has really helped me to restructure how I think and how I deal with how I feel. And it's funny because what we learn in those rooms really has so little to do with the substance we're there for, but it has so much more to do with, like I said, our thoughts and our feelings and how we manage those and how we manage our relationships. So I think that's a fantastic program. Those are free. Look into those. If you can find a program that you identify with, I would highly recommend checking those out. For some people, finding a great church in your area can do a world of wonders. I don't talk about it a ton, but I will occasionally go to church. It's been a long time. Just like with AA, I can walk into a church and fully know and understand and recognize that I'm probably not going to agree with 100% of what is said here, and that's okay. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about that stuff unless you guys really want to know what I believe, but finding where I stand ideologically has helped me to find that sense of peace on a level that nothing can. I don't want to say that it helps me more than therapy, it helps me more than medication. I think it is just a foundation or a supplement. I really don't know exactly where it stands, but it is an essential part of this whole system of recovery I have going on. And that's recovery from alcoholism, that's recovery from grief and PTSD and all the other stuff that make up who I am, as we all have our stuff. So I started to get way too into it, even though I was going to keep it brief with that one. So if I said anything there that intrigues you, feel free to bring it up in the comments and I'll either address it there or maybe we'll talk about it in another video. We'll see. And support groups. Don't forget the value of support groups. I talked about this in a recent video. I very recently started a private Facebook group for small YouTube creators, and it is specifically an emotional support group. However, because we are all in a position right now that is making us feel a little bit more fragile, a little bit more, well, a lot more anxious, that invitation is open to any of you guys. So if you want to join that Facebook group, please go to my video. I'll link it down below with the title Mental Health Check-In 1 month on YouTube and Isolated or something like that. In the description there is a link to the Facebook group and you will be accepted, and feel free to talk there about how you're feeling and how things are going with all this going on. Moving along. Someone asked, how do you handle a friend who has been in your life for about 9 years, just up and basically leave? He has been my rock and recently has started distancing himself from me and I can't get an answer on why it's happening. First of all, I'm really sorry that you're going through that. That does sound so incredibly difficult. I've experienced losing friends, but not quite a best friend on that level. There are so many reasons that friends might decide to leave our lives, and it sounds like you can't get an answer to why. So I can only bring up a couple of examples from my life. There was one friend I had in college who I noticed unfriended me on Facebook and stopped talking to me altogether. And I later found out that, and this was a guy friend, that was part of a little group of gamer friends that I was part of at the time. Yes, I used to spend my days online gaming. So there's another little nugget of information about me. But anyway, this friend just kind of disappeared, and I later found out that he dropped all of his female friends because he was in a relationship and those friendships made his girlfriend at the time uncomfortable. And whether I agreed with that move or not, I felt that it wasn't my place to judge. I wasn't in that relationship, and it was clearly not personal. So it's sad, and with any loss, you really have to go through a grieving process. I will say that very recently, and when I say very recently, I mean like within the past 3 years or so, I had a friend stop talking to me altogether, and I've never been given a reason why. I've tried asking for a reason. I have a hunch as to kind of where it all started. I talked in a previous video about a really toxic workplace that I was in a few years ago. After losing a couple family members, some things in my life just got really chaotic. And unfortunately, as a product of all that chaos, I lost this friend, and to this day, I still cannot get an answer as to what I did wrong, if anything, or what have people been saying about me to make you think that I've done something wrong. And that's frustrating, and I don't know that I fully know how to navigate that, except to be a little bit... If I can just be real with you, and if I'm real with myself, just like I've said about dating, I don't want to be with somebody who doesn't want to be with me. So as much as I may miss these friendships, if they not only don't want to be my friend anymore, but they don't even have the respect to tell me what I did to lose them as a friend, is that really somebody worth my time and my worries? No. I mean, simply put, I don't think so. But again, with any loss, there is a grieving process. So there are tons of resources online. I've mentioned therapy a good bit. Where I get therapy is actually a grief center. So a lot of my therapy is around grief, though specifically we are talking about actual death. And in some ways, losing somebody who's still alive is more complicated and heartbreaking. I know that that is sort of an issue that is tackled in programs like Al-Anon. I don't know. Sorry, I can't give a more concrete answer, but I do think that looking into those topics like Al-Anon and 12-step and grief can kind of help to pull coping mechanisms and resources to kind of get over this hump. But at the end of the day, you apparently care a lot, and this person is neglecting to acknowledge that care. And for whatever reason, I think it's good to have compassion and empathy for that person, but we just can't hold on to people that don't have that sort of respect for us. It makes me wonder how good of a friend this person was to you, if I'm being honest. Somebody else asked, how do you try to get yourself out of a depressive episode, especially during a time like this? So, in my first video that was heavily focused on mental health, I talked about how anxiety and depression show up in my life. I will also link that one below. But really, when it comes to depression, how it largely shows up in my life is fatigue. Sometimes I don't have depressive thoughts that accompany that. It is just simply, I cannot get out of bed. And really, medication is what helps. My experience with it has been pretty simple. The solutions have been pretty simple, though there are times when I have a depressive mood. My thoughts will be very pessimistic and low and sad. And in those moments, I typically don't want to hear people tell me that it's gonna get better. Sometimes I just need to sit in it. I will always hold on to a hope that the next day will be better, an acknowledgement that it is not better now. And if there's anything that I'm sad about, or just sad about feeling the way I'm feeling, if I can cry, I will get that out. I am a strong believer in a good cry. I'm sorry if that seemed hostile. But yes, I don't hold back tears. As long as I am in a place where it is appropriate to cry, I will cry, because that, for me, eases a lot of tension that I feel in my body. So after a good cry, I tend to feel a lot more relaxed. But Also, depression is something that's pretty new in my life, so I may not be the best person to give advice about it. Anxiety is really my mean best friend, if you will. And on the topic of anxiety, one of you asked, what are you doing to not get anxious while being at home? I would guess that this is probably a question that everyone is asking everyone right now. I will say, when I started to feel antsy and anxious here at home during this time, I started to wonder if other people were feeling this way too. And as I gathered information and found that everybody I spoke to was feeling more anxious, oddly, there was some comfort in knowing that I'm not the only one. And I did mention that mental health check-in video that I said I would link below. It is the one with the thumbnail that says isolation and me. I really talk pretty in depth there about my experience with anxiety during this time. But to put it simply, once I recognized that this whole situation is very conducive to anxiety, I decided that every single day I need to dedicate time and energy to fostering my mental health. So that means that I am having conversations with people, whether that be my friends, family, a bunch of you guys, about how we're feeling, just getting that out. Not only expressing those feelings, but also helping somebody as they need somebody to lean on. Both of those things really help to bring comfort. It is important to be active, not something I've been the best at lately, admittedly. But yeah, I have a hard time making myself leave the apartment if I don't specifically need something. But I will take time to take on a project in my apartment, clean, reorganize, things like that that keep me active and really kind of get me off my phone and off my computer for some time. And that is so refreshing. So reaching out, unplugging, and finding some way to have face-to-face contact. And I mentioned earlier that oftentimes a good bit of that for me happens on the weekends, when I really just kind of decompress with my boyfriend. And I will spend an afternoon here and there with one of my close girlfriends, as long as we are keeping our distance and making sure that we're being very safe about it. I don't know if that's super advisable, but we're all keeping to ourselves. We're all women who happen to live at home alone with our cats. I'm just realizing that I have a type when it comes to friends. Actually, I think I turned these women into cat ladies, so maybe that's something to talk about later. But I will say it helps to have amazing, fantastic friends who understand my mental health, who know a good bit about what I go through, and are intelligent and compassionate people. I have that in my two best friends that are in the area, and I have that in my boyfriend. And having a support system that is both intelligent and compassionate really can help me get through just about anything. I recommend it. You have to know people like that in your life, so get closer to them. And last question, because for some reason it was my favorite. Hey Alicia, I noticed you still say I'm an alcoholic, 7 years sober in your videos. I was wondering if you still considered yourself to be an alcoholic, or if you consider yourself recovered. Or is alcoholism a thing you always carry with you and not something you overcome at some point in time? I mean, no offense whatsoever by this question, just wondering. And I want to start off by saying that sort of question should not offend any person in recovery. I would venture to say that that sort of question should not offend any sort of marginalized group, any sort of person who is representing a mental illness of some sort. Really, a question that is structured in such a way I don't think should offend anyone. We should feel free to ask questions that are legitimate questions, especially when you want to learn more about sensitive matters that affect other people's lives and you want to educate yourself. Don't ever be afraid to ask those questions. And if somebody gives you attitude for asking a question that way and asking it as respectfully as you did, walk away, because they're not going to give you good advice. They're not going to give you good information. So that's my first bit of advice there. But in terms of the terminology we use, it's kind of a mix. I will often say that I'm an alcoholic in recovery. If you were to sit in an AA meeting, you will hear, I am an alcoholic. I am a recovered alcoholic. I am a recovering alcoholic. And there's not much of a difference, if any. Because what we know about alcoholism is that once it is part of us, we don't know for sure if this is something in our DNA or if this is something that enters our lives at a certain point. But what we know is that once it enters us, it doesn't leave us. One phrase that I think puts it perfectly is, and I apologize if I'm not saying this perfectly, but you can turn a cucumber into a pickle, but you can't turn a pickle into a cucumber. So, to say that I'm recovered, I don't use that terminology because it is important for an alcoholic or an addict in recovery to recognize that we are not invincible, that there is always a possibility that we could relapse. So for me, the term recovered implies that this is something that is behind us for good and is no longer an illness we live with. And that is just not true of this disease. Even though I believe that I had my very last drink on October 3rd, 2012. This is a lifelong disease. This is a disease that requires lifelong management. The plus side of that is that the program of recovery just creates a life that is so much better, not only better than the life we had before, but in many ways a lot better than our lives would have been if this had never become an issue. So yes, I am an alcoholic. That does not mean that I drink. For me, it means the opposite. It means that I love it so much that I can't have it, or else I will not survive. And it's just as simple as that. So oftentimes you will hear me refer to myself as an alcoholic. I would say most often I say an alcoholic in recovery. I think that best depicts where I am in my life with this disease. But if you guys have more questions about what it's like to be an alcoholic, what it's like to be in recovery, terminology we use, because you'll hear us throw around words like sobriety, recovery, active addiction, platitudes. There are so many words that are thrown around in this community, and it is so important that people like me infuse some education into the general population, because not only is it important to reduce stigma, to really squash the stigma around addiction, because any of us can fall victim to it. It is a non-discriminatory illness. But the more education we bring to this topic for the general public, the more people can get a handle on their own addictions and recover faster. So I would love to do some sort of Q&A around that sometime if that's something you guys want to talk about. If you guys have questions about that, again, feel free to ask me in the comments. Feel free to DM me. That is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, as you guys have probably gathered. So I'm more than happy to start more conversations around that and mental health in general. So I hope that this has helped somebody in dealing with particularly anxiety in this time, because I know that that is such an issue right now. If you're still struggling, please, there are resources. There is help available remotely. We do have a support group for our little community here, and you do have people in your life that love you that can probably relate to what you're going through right now. So please reach out. Please reach out. I would love to hear how you're coping with this very strange and foreign lifestyle that most of us don't know how to deal with. How are you coping with that? I want to know. So feel free to drop that down in the comments. I'd love to get some more tips because I still can use the help. I should mention that there is one person out there who's watching this that's not me, and to you, Thank you. This video was probably longer than I intended it to be because that is just the Hello Leash way. I just referred to myself in the third person, which makes me feel uncomfortable, so I'm going to go. And like I said, I'll see you in the comments. Bye.